This is a creature, you guys, that is part bird, perhaps, part monkey, maybe. Perhaps it's a bat. Who knows, but it's roughly the size of a child. It definitely has wings, and it makes that sound.
History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. As we'd mentioned in part 1, for much of human history, monsters, curses, all those creepy, crawly things that go bump in the night, or those left-handed magical powers, they were considered genuine things, right? A curse was considered to function the same way a scientific principle would. Things like ghouls, the undead, you name it, they were considered real, and they were considered to have their own territory, their predilections, etc. A lot of these beliefs remain in some form in the modern day. And, in each of the cases we're looking at, we can find a few proposed skeptical or mundane explanations. But we want to, again, emphasize in each of these cases, we're going to end by asking whether or not people still genuinely believe in these monsters. Where do you want to start? We're globetrotting today.
I'd love to head over to Indonesia for a moment, if that's all right with you, Ben. I want to go to the island of Java, one of the large islands there in Indonesia. And I want to go really to the center of it. I want to go to the rainforest area, or the area where there's dense forests at least, and many volcanoes around in this part of the world, specifically in these islands. And and lots of water surrounding them because they are islands. It's a really neat place. It's a weird word to say, neat. It's beautiful, right? It's filled with life, both plant and animal, and it doesn't have the same density of humans as other places in the world. Like most of the places where I've lived in the past, there's just so many humans. In parts of Java, there are not that many humans, but there are places for humans to travel and to visit. But sometimes when a human travels out into these places where there are lots of plants and animals, they're going to hear something or maybe see something that they're unfamiliar with. And when they do, they might go back and tell their friends about it. And this is a story about one of those tales. So there is a sound, a very specific sound that is associated with a cryptid that is said to exist specifically on this island of Java, but perhaps on other islands in Indonesia as well, or in the surrounding area. But specifically, we're going to focus on Java. There's a sound, and it goes a little something like this. Ahool. Ahool. Yeah, there's like an L at the end, but the most important thing is the ah and then the ooh. And that little L, the way it kind of shapes at the end there. So that sound is probably the biggest thing associated with this cryptid, as well as a couple of physical characteristics. This is a creature, you guys, that is part bird, perhaps, part monkey, maybe. Perhaps it's a bat. Who knows, but it's roughly the size of a child. It definitely has wings, and it makes that sound. Ooh.
Mm-hmm. And that sound might strike you as a little bit silly if you are listening to this show in the daylight. If you are listening to this while you're walking through your favorite part of town, and you're passing a fast food joint, or maybe you're at work and you hear Ahool in your headphones, then it seems like it's something that's easy to dismiss. But again, if you put yourself mentally in this situation, you're in the woods, it's dark, you're alone, right? And you are in one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, a place where even a lot of locals can run into animals that they have never seen before, then you can understand how this noise starts to sound a lot less silly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And by the way, that sound, it makes sense why people call it the Ahool. That's what it's known as. At least in the Western sources that we've been able to find, that's how it is described. And let's continue talking about what it looks like. We talked about part monkey, part bat, part owl, part whatever. It is described as having a primate head. If it were, let's say, a bat, because if you imagine the head of a primate and you shrink it down and then imagine like the head of a bat, you've seen pictures of both of those, you can see similarities, especially if it was in a chance encounter, a very quick swooping down event, let's say, with one of these things. If it swooped at you, maybe it attacked you and you just caught a glimpse of the face, maybe you would think, oh, primate or monkey, lemur, some kind of animal that is like that. That is, I think maybe it's just a really terrifying image in my mind, at least, because I go back and I think to movies that I've seen in the past. You remember a little movie with flying monkeys?
Yes, Wizard of Oz.
Yes. That goes into my brain when I think about the Ahool. But not, I mean, that one's, it's a little silly. But at the same time, that's the image I get in my brain, especially if I'm thinking about walking alone in a rainforest like that and something swooping down. The wingspan, you may ask, okay, this thing's the size of a child. How big are the wings? Well, they're purported to be up to around 10 feet. 10 feet. If you stretch your arms out and you're like me, almost 6 feet tall, that's 6 feet. Like maybe stretch your arms out. Think about how long that is. That's however tall you are. Well, this is 10 feet. That's huge. Horrifying. Oh, and it's covered in gray fur. We've got to make sure we mention that. And of course, the long, sharp claws that any good monster has on its feet and hands. Very dark eyes that are big, apparently. And super creepy stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, if we look at it objectively, then we can tell a few things. First, whatever it is people believe they're seeing, they're agreeing that it doesn't have a protruding beak, which would be one of the things indicative of a lot of birds in the area. Also, the idea of fur adds to the concept of a flying mammal like a bat, but the only true flying mammal. But I would note that if you're seeing this in the dark, because the Ahool is known to be nocturnal, then the fur might just look gray. You know what I mean? Because it's dark. You're really depending on starlight and moonlight by that point, because there's not an electricity grid out there where a lot of these things are reportedly found. So curious.
Are we sure it's fur? Like, are you going to...
Right.
How can you be told that it's fur? I guess. Depends on what kind of flashlight you've got, I guess.
Yeah, just so.
So the information we have about this Ahool comes from really one book that we were able to find. Seriously, a single book and a single account that was not first person. At least the author that wrote the book didn't actually have this encounter. They're describing an encounter. And this encounter is supposedly a Western naturalist who was hanging out there. He's the son of some other prominent naturalist. And he describes hearing the vocalization of the Ahool, as well as seeing a creature, that has this gray fur, has claws, is creepy looking, maybe a monkey, maybe a bat, maybe a huge bird. We have to talk about what happens when someone, let's say a Western explorer of some kind, is visiting a place that they're not familiar with or they don't live there, and they're having conversations with the indigenous people who do live there. And there are folklore tales about creatures out in the woods or in the water, and when the Westerner, hears about those stories, maybe they embellish them a little bit. Maybe they view those stories as, oh, what's a terrible word that got thrown around a lot around these times in the, the 20th century, 19th century, exotic, the term exotic, right? And just like that would be bandied about, as in it's so strange and different. Well, I just wonder if that's maybe what's happening here. And what was really seen, if this account is in fact true, was just something that lives out there that is natural and not monstrous at all.
With which they would be unfamiliar, because again, there's a vast array of animals that exist only in that region. So if you are an explorer from the outside, you would maybe be familiar with some analogs of that. Like if you're a European in this era, you would have been aware of something like owls, but there's almost no chance you would have been aware of other similar birds in this area. You know, that's another part of why so many Europeans back in the day believed that the African continent and the Far East, from their perspective, were filled with monsters, because they would get these reports that would change over time. Eventually, someone with a pen and paper would try to draw or carve, a representation of what the person is telling them. They heard from a person who heard from another person on the Silk Road or whatever, and then boom, unicorns.
All right, Ben, so here we go. First, I want to show you this video, which is of a specific owl species that is native to the island of Java. And I want to at least propose to you that I think this might be our culprit for the Ahool, this specific owl. Okay, and then here is the other reason why I think it might be this owl, and it has to do with the sound. Here we go. Listen to this. Tell me what you think. Okay, so do you hear that? I'll tell you what I hear. I hear ah, and then ooh. Ah, ooh. So this is the spotted wood owl of Indonesia and Java. And this thing, it mates like any other animal on the planet. So I propose that if there were two of these owls in close proximity, let's say if it was mating season or something like that, and they're both vocalizing with the ooh and the ah, you may hear ahool, ahool, in a very strange way. It's almost like it's coming from two different animals, because it is. But it would feel spooky if it was up above you, high in the tree line. And then if one of them did swoop down upon you with those huge wings, you would be freaked out and probably run away.